You're watching Noir Street. I'm your host, Nero Wolfe. Every story hides a secret, and every shadow hides a clue. Tell us where in the world you're watching from. Subscribe, tap the like button, and join us as we drift into mystery. Chapter 1. The car that carried Silence, the last train car, was nearly empty, which made every movement louder and every choice deliberate. Graham Sutter, a careful man with careful enemies, chose that car instead of the crowded ones. Hours later, he was found dead in his seat, untouched by struggle or obvious harm. Passengers spoke of nothing unusual, which made the ordinary feel arranged, and I began, as I generally do when Wolfe sends me to collect the city's mistakes, with the only thing that never lies, where people choose to sit. At 9:15 that evening, I was in the office on West 35th Street pretending to work. That is not as easy as it sounds. Real work can be ducked, delayed, or decorated. Pretending to do it requires posture. I had a stack of correspondence on my desk, a pencil in my hand, and an expression I hoped would discourage interruption. It did not. The telephone rang. From the kitchen drifted the smell of veal and mushrooms, which meant Fritz was in one of his civilized moods, and therefore not to be disturbed unless the house were on fire, or Inspector Kramer had learned manners, both of which were improbable. Wolfe was upstairs in the plant rooms among the orchids, where he spends 2 hours each day proving that affection can exist between a man and several hundred flowers, without improving his opinion of humanity generally. So the telephone became my responsibility. I picked it up. Office of Nero Wolfe. Archie Goodwin speaking. The voice that answered was male, controlled, and in no mood to waste either his own time or mine. This is Lieutenant Rocliffe. That was enough to spoil the next 5 minutes. What happened? I asked. Did Kramer sprain a theory? He ignored that, which is one of Rocliffe's chief virtues. A man named Graham Sutter was found dead in a subway car at the final terminal of the downtown line. He had your employer's name and address in his wallet. That got my attention, though not my affection. Did he owe Wolfe money? Number. Then he may be dead from disappointment. He had a card with your office number written on the back. The body has been identified. We are notifying relatives. If Wolfe wants in, now is the time. That was better. Police usually call private detectives after the body has become a theory. They don't wish to surrender. If they were calling before the corpse had gone cold enough for paperwork, something about the corpse was already bothering them. What's odd? I asked. Everything that isn't visible. No marks, no struggle, no robbery. He was seated as if asleep. Last car on the train, almost empty. Nobody noticed a thing. Then why us? Because a man doesn't carry Nero Wolfe's number without having some intention. Get down here or don't. He named the station and hung up in a style that could have improved if dropped from a bridge. I went to the doorway and aimed my voice upward. Wolfe! Nothing. I tried again. Wolfe, police, corpse and transit. That did it. A moment later, I heard his tread on the front stairs, measured and offended. He entered the office with the expression of a man who has been dragged from a conversation worth having into one that probably won't be. What? He said. I told him. Graham Sutter dead in a subway car. Rocliffe asking early. Wolfe's card on the body. No visible cause. No scene. No struggle. No robbery. Almost empty last car. Wolfe's eyelids lowered a fraction in him. That is often more informative than speech. Did Rocliffe say how our name came to be in the man's wallet? Number only that it was there. He moved to his desk and lowered himself into the chair as if reclaiming the house from civic interference. You will go. That was my bold forecast. Observe, do not theorize beyond your capacity. That narrows my evening. He ignored it. A careful man with my number in his wallet, and no appointment in the book suggests one of 3 things. He intended to consult me and had not yet done so. He consulted me through an intermediary and concealed it from himself badly, or someone wished us connected to his death. That's comforting. It is orderly. Comfort is irrelevant. He reached for the beer Fritz had placed earlier, and then, because he was still annoyed with the city, did not drink it. Find out who Graham Sutter was, why he chose the last car, how long he had been dead before discovery, and who sat near him. Also determine why no one noticed anything unusual. When many people notice nothing, it is because they have all mistaken the same thing for ordinary. You make murder sound like office routine. It often is. Go. I got my coat and hat. Fritz appeared from the hall carrying a tray and one look. You are leaving, he said. Yes. At this hour, yes. The veal will suffer. That's tragic. His mouth tightened. Mr. Wolf has standards. The city has none. That is why he stays here and sends me. Fritz gave a short nod. Be back before the sauce congeals. That is Fritz in full sympathy. The station was on the Lower East Side, where the city has long since stopped apologizing for grime and now charges it rent. Rowcliffe met me on the platform wearing his hat shoved back and his face arranged around disapproval. He looked me over as if hoping I had come only to be told to leave. You took your time. I dressed. He grunted and jerked his head toward the train. Last car, they've held it on a siding. We walked past men in uniforms whose expressions indicated they considered me decorative, which in police company is often an improvement. The car stood under hard electric light and the stale, tired smell of public transit. Metal, damp coats, old newspapers, brakes and human patience worn thin. It had been emptied except for the dead man who sat where he had been found, midway down on the left, in a seat by the window. Graham Sutter was in his late 40s perhaps, maybe 50, lean and well, kept in the discreet way of a man who does not dress to be admired, but to avoid comment. Dark overcoat, grey suit, neat shoes, hat on the rack above. No blood, no torn clothing, no dramatic angle of collapse. He sat slightly turned toward the aisle, head fallen a little to one side, one gloved hand in his lap and the other hanging down with 2 fingers almost touching the floor. If you had boarded at a busy station and glanced once, you might have taken him for a commuter making a respectable effort at sleep. The doctor rose from crouching beside him. You're Goodwin. I still am, Dr. Fenwick. Preliminary only, no visible trauma, no signs of a fight, no cyanosis worth betting on. Could be poison, cardiac failure, or some other internal mischief. But he didn't die theatrically. That disappoints the newspapers, I said. It disappoints me. A body ought to show some professional courtesy. I looked around. The car was one of the older models, long bench seats facing inward, lights too bright, windows reflecting the whole business back at you with less charity than mirrors. The end door to the next car had been closed. There were only 8 or 9 occupied seats in the whole thing, if the transit men had their count right, and Graham Sutter had chosen one of the last available spots that gave him both an aisle view and a clear reflection in the darkened window. That interested me at once. Rowcliffe said. He was found at the terminal by the trainman making the sweep. Ride ended. Everybody off. This one stayed put. No one claims they heard trouble. Who rode with him? We've got some of them. Office girl from 42nd Street, a salesman who got off at Bleecker, an old woman from Canal, 1 sailor, 2 students, and a woman with shopping parcels who swears she never looked at him. City full of people not looking. That's a civic improvement. Rowcliffe gave me the wallet contents. License, business cards, some cash, monthly rail pass, 2 theatre ticket stubs from the previous week, and one of Wolf's office cards, with our number penciled on the back in another hand. I pocketed that hand for later. The name on the business card read Graham Sutter, adjustment consultant. That could mean insurance, shipping claims, legal salvage, or respectable blackmail under a better title, I asked. Any bag, number, any papers. Number. Then whatever he was carrying isn't carrying him now. Rowcliffe's face did not improve. The conductor remembers him boarding alone at Grand Central. Last car, not crowded, says Sutter. Walked the platform first and passed 2 fuller cars before taking this one. That's careful. Or nervous. Same breed, different collars. I moved down the aisle and sat in the seat opposite Sutter's, because if a man is going to choose where to die, The least I can do is sit down and be polite about understanding him. From there I could see what he had seen. The window gave back a reflection of the whole car interior, though dim and layered with tunnel black. The opposite bench ran nearly empty. Anyone entering from the adjoining car would appear first in reflection before reaching him. Anyone sitting 3 seats down on the opposite side would be visible without direct staring. A cautious man, a man expecting to be followed, approached or joined, might prefer exactly that spot. I said it aloud. Rowcliffe looked at me. What? He chose the seat because it let him watch without turning his head. Reflection, aisle, end door, and platform on approach. You get that from sitting down. Yes, you should try it more often. He ignored me. He's improving. I asked for the passengers in order, the office girl first. Young, tired, wearing duty like a hemline. She said, Sutter boarded at Grand Central, looked once toward the front of the train, then walked back and sat down 2 benches beyond her. He kept his hat on his lap for several stops before putting it up on the rack. He looked at the window more than at people. Did anyone join him? I asked. She frowned. Not exactly. That's not a sentence. Try again. At 14th Street, a woman got on and stood near the end door for a while. Dark coat, scarf. She might have sat later. I'm not sure. I was reading. Did Sutter react? He looked up once, then down again. That was something small and therefore useful. The salesman was less help and more talk. He noticed Sutter only because Sutter changed seats once before the train left 42nd. Moving from the right side to the left, from a window that showed only tunnel wall to one that gave him the carriage reflection better. That pleased me. The old woman from Canal remembered that he had not been asleep. Men asleep don't keep waking their eyes, she said. He was waiting. That was very good for an old woman with groceries. No one saw him speak. No one heard him cry out. No one noticed him slump. The woman with parcels remembered a dark, coated woman leaving the car at Houston, or maybe Delancey, which is the sort of precision cities are built on. The sailor had been drunk enough to see things in duplicate and not know whether either mattered. I went back to Sutter's seat and examined the floor. There was a newspaper under the opposite bench, 1 cigarette stub flattened by somebody else's shoe, a gum wrapper, and nothing near the dead man's hand except 1 tiny white fleck by the base of the seat support. I picked it up with my handkerchief paper. Number tablet coating maybe, or paint, or church plaster for all I knew. I kept it. Then I checked the rack above him. No hat except his, no parcel forgotten. But on the seat edge, where his overcoat sleeve had rested there, was the faintest dark smear, almost invisible until the light caught it sideways. Not grease, more like cosmetic or carbon transfer, the sort you get from dyed gloves, cheap leather, or a woman's handbag dragged carelessly. Not much. Enough? Rowcliffe had been watching me in a style that suggested he disapproved of private intelligence as a category. Well, Sutter chose this car and that seat because he expected company or surveillance. He wanted the quiet, the reflection, and room to notice approach. He got dead instead. Yes, try not to sound jealous. The conductor came back middle-aged, bored, and more honest than his pay deserved. He repeated that Sutter had paced the platform before boarding. Like he wanted to make sure nobody was on him, he said. Or like he wanted somebody to think that. That was excellent and annoying. By the time I left the station I had enough to feed Wolf, and not enough to satisfy him, which is the ordinary state of my labor. Back at the Brownstone, he was in the office exactly where wisdom ought to be when the city is misbehaving. Fritz had salvaged the veal, and for that I was grateful. Well, Wolf said. I gave him Graham Sutter in full adjustment consultant. Careful man, our card with a penciled number. Chose the last car deliberately after passing fuller ones. Chose a seat that allowed him to watch the whole carriage in reflection. Possibly moved once for a better angle, seemed to be waiting, not sleeping. No struggle, no marks, no obvious cause. A dark-coated woman near the end door, remembered imperfectly by 2 passengers. Tiny white fleck from the floor, smear on the seat edge, missing bag or papers if he had carried any. A dead man seated where caution had put him. Wolf listened with his eyes shut. When I finished, He opened one. The seat, yes, is the key. That flatters my judgment. Number it flatters his fear. He shifted, displeased with the entire species. A man who chooses a nearly empty final car when crowded cars are available is not seeking privacy for peace. He is seeking space to observe. Therefore he expected danger, contact, or both. The woman in the dark coat may matter, but do not yet marry her. Tomorrow find out who Graham Sutter worked for, what he adjusted, and why he had my card. Also determine whether he had consulted me without my knowledge, which would be tiresome even in death. That sounds like breakfast plans. It sounds like a case. Go to bed when you are done being useless. That is Wolf's bedtime blessing. Upstairs later, with the city noises filtering through my window, and the smell of rain still caught somewhere in the brickwork across the street, I thought about Graham Sutter sitting in that car with the whole carriage laid out in reflection. Men do not choose seats like that for comfort. They choose them because they believe position can bargain with danger. Most of the time they are right. That night he had chosen perfectly for caution and badly for survival. And somewhere in the city there was a reason he had put Wolf's number in his wallet and boarded the quietest car on the train. Chapter 2. The seat that wasn't random. If a man dies in public without making enough trouble to interest the public, you begin with his habits. If he has no habits available, you begin with his choices. Graham Sutter's last useful choice had been a seat in the final car of a downtown train, and by breakfast next morning, Wolf had reduced my duties to that one fact with the brutal simplicity he favors when he is feeling both correct and underfed. The seat, he said, over coffee. Yes, do not look for drama where geometry suffices. A man chooses where to sit for reasons. Find them. That sounds almost philosophical. It is practical. Philosophy is what people invent when the practical has already injured them. He was at the table with kidneys, eggs, toast, and his morning beer arranged before him by Fritz in the exact relation to one another that civilization requires. I was beside him with coffee and a roll, trying to look as if I welcomed daylight and transit murders equally. Fritz was at Wolf's shoulder carrying another dish and a reserve of disapproval large enough to feed all 5 boroughs. You will be late for lunch, Fritz said to me. That depends. On what? On whether the dead man believes in tidy office hours. The dead never do, Fritz said. That is why they are inconsiderate. Wolf ignored us both. Archie Sutter did not take the nearest available seat. He selected one that gave him advantage. Learn whether he was waiting for contact, fearing surveillance, or staging anxiety for another observer. Also, the woman in the dark coat. I thought you said not to marry her. I said not yet. Engagement is not forbidden. That was my blessing. I took it with toast and left. The train car was still held for the police yard, which showed either efficiency or panic. Since Rowcliffe was involved, I assumed the second, and was grateful for it. He met me with the same face he had worn the night before, which is to say a face suggesting the world had been insufficiently organized and meant to remain so. You again? Yes, it's becoming a romance. I'd rather get smallpox. That can be arranged later. I want the car in daylight. He grunted and took me through the yard. Daylight improved the facts and worsened the mystery under the pale grey spill through the shed windows. The last car looked less theatrical and more exact. Every seat was where the transit authority had installed it with bureaucratic indifference. Every handhold hung in repetitive rows. Every window returned a different cut of the interior, depending on angle and dirt. Last night, I had only enough light for instinct. Now I had geometry. I walked the platform first because Sutter had. The conductor had said he boarded at Grand Central after pacing a little and passing fuller cars. I did the same. Front cars crowded. Middle cars busy enough for anonymity. The last car nearly empty, with the mild desolation people distrust after dark. If you wanted space, you took it. If you wanted invisibility, you avoided it. If you wanted to see who came in after you, you loved it. Inside, I sat where Sutter had ended up and stayed there for a full minute, doing nothing but look from that seat. Left side midway down. He had both end doors in peripheral reach. The forward door showed anyone entering from the adjacent car. The rear door showed the platform at station stops. The aisle lay clean before him. Most important, the darkened window beside him gave back the whole interior in a broad, dull reflection. Not perfect, not enough to identify freckles, but more than enough to catch motion, approach, hesitation, and anyone standing too long near the doors. A careful man could watch without seeming to watch. He could keep his head still and let the glass do the turning. That was no accident and not comfort. I shifted to the seat opposite, then to the bench ahead, then to one on the right side where the salesman had first seen him. There the reflection collapsed. The angle lost the rear door almost entirely. The opposite bench blocked the aisle view. If Sutter had first sat there and then moved, he had moved for tactical reasons. Not whim. Rowcliffe had been watching me as if he expected me eventually to confess to upholstery. Well, Sutter chose this place because it let him see everything without advertising it. Both doors, the aisle, and every passenger entering the car. The seat wasn't random, it was preparation. That I know, he said. I want something I don't. You may have to improve your tone first. He looked as though he was considering whether murder charges could be framed against my vocabulary. Then he chose patience, which in him always looks painful. I asked for the passenger statements again, not because I had forgotten them, but because repetition is to witness what salt is to roads in winter. It brings out the hidden corrosion. The office girl was brought in first. Same coat, same tired face, same expression of a woman who had spent one night being frightened by the possibility she had sat 3 seats away from death and failed to notice. Miss Watson, I said. Yesterday you said, Mr. Sutter boarded alone and looked toward the front before walking back.
Yes.
Did he look like a man searching for someone or avoiding one? She blinked. Both. That was better. I asked her to describe the sequence exactly. He boarded, paused inside the door, looked once up the aisle and once at the reflection in the window. Saturday on the right side first, near the rear half, rose before the train pulled out, crossed and took the left side seat where he was found. Did he seem embarrassed about moving? I asked. Number deliberate, like he had changed his mind after checking. Did he look at anyone when he moved? Yes. The end door, then the window. I thanked her and sent her away with less sympathy than I felt, because sympathy from strangers is another form of nuisance in New York. The salesman added something new on second pass, because I asked the right stupid question. Did he take off his gloves? I said. Number, but he took one out of his pocket first. Which pocket? Inner coat, I think. Why? No reason. Yet, that was interesting because careful men don't put gloves inside pockets unless they've been doing something with their hands they don't want left on leather. The old woman from Canal improved too. Old women often do if you show them patience and not condescension, which is more than most of the city manages. He had a paper, she said. What kind? Folded small white maybe. He looked at it once after 20, 3rd Street, and then put it away. Which pocket? Breast pocket, left side. That gave me 2 inner pocket events and no paper recovered on the body. Better. The woman with parcels, after being allowed 10 minutes to explain that the subway is no place for widows, finally admitted that the dark-coated woman who had stood by the end door did not merely stand. She watched reflections too. How do you know? I asked. Because she wasn't looking at anybody directly. She kept looking at the window. That put one more card on the table. When I got back inside the car, I used chalk on the floorboards and a transit map to mark stops, probable positions, and passenger distribution. Rowcliffe watched in pained silence, which is one of the better police sounds. If Sutter expected contact, I said. The seat let him detect approach before being boxed in. If he expected surveillance, the seat let him monitor it. If the dark-coated woman was his contact or tail, she chose a position that gave her the same advantages without committing. And he ends up dead anyway, which means either what killed him didn't require close struggle, or he failed to recognize the danger even when seated to prevent exactly that. Rowcliffe's jaw worked. Poison. Maybe. But no vial, no cup, no syringe, no puncture the doctor liked, and no struggle. He could have swallowed something before boarding. Yes, then why choose the seat? A man dying from his own schedule doesn't usually take tactical positions first. He hated that because it was right. I examined the seat edge again and had Rowcliffe bring better light. The smear I'd noticed last night was still there, faint and dark against the worn varnish. Not blood, not transit grease either. The texture had a slight drag in it, as if something soft and treated had brushed, paused and lifted, glove dye perhaps, or cosmetic transfer from a handbag edge. It sat exactly where a standing passenger's hand or bag might touch if she was steadying herself near Sutter's row without sitting. I pointed. There. Rowcliffe bent, squinted, and said a word unsuitable for church or children. So somebody stood near him. Or near the seat. How long? Long enough to leave a trace and not enough to make anybody remember speech. That took us back to the dark-coated woman and made her less decorative. Before lunch, I went to Graham Sutter's office. Adjustment consultant turned out to mean he specialized in claim negotiations for companies, too respectable to call them salvage disputes, and too greedy to leave insurance settlements untrimmed. His office was 3 rooms on Madison Avenue with metal files, disciplined carpets, and a receptionist who had been crying in a manner that suggested she considered it administratively regrettable. Her name was Mara Blythe. She gave me coffee I didn't want, and facts I did. Sutter had been careful. That was the word everyone used, which is always dangerous because once enough people use one adjective for the dead, the adjective starts behaving like embalming fluid. He handled delicate claim settlements, disputed estate adjustments, trust reallocations, and occasionally private family papers, when lawyers wished the matter to remain outside court and inside embarrassment. That improved the field at once. Family papers? I asked. Yes, meaning blackmail with cufflinks. She looked offended, which told me I was near something. He was discreet, she said. Discreet is a word invented by people who bill by the hour for silence. That did not please her. Good, pleasing witnesses too early is expensive later. Not by name, but yesterday, shortly before leaving. He had telephoned a number from an old card file, spoken to no one, then written a telephone number on a business card and put it in his wallet. That would be ours. He had also told Miss Marr that if he had not returned by 10, she was to lock the pale green file in his desk and call his brother in Boston. That was excellent, because the pale green file was now missing. Was he frightened? I asked. No, she said, then corrected herself. Alert. Difference. Frightened men rush. Mr. Sutter arranged. I liked her better for that. When I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was in the office where Wisdom and Obesity had long ago signed a permanent lease. I gave him the day. Sutter's seat was selected for surveillance advantages, not comfort. He moved once for a better line of sight. He likely carried a folded paper later missing. He may have taken something from his inner pocket before settling, the dark-coated woman. Also used reflection, not direct watching. A smear on the seat edge suggests someone stood near him briefly. Sutter handled delicate family paper adjustments and private embarrassments for money. Yesterday he meant to contact Wolfe, but had not yet done so. A pale green file is missing from his office. Wolfe listened with his eyes shut, then opened one. The seat was preparation. Yes, the woman, still unwed. Pufui she is either contact, watcher, or decoy. Perhaps all 3. Sutter's death occurred without noise, because the method required neither force nor panic, but his seating proves he anticipated risk. Therefore the successful attack exploited something he did not classify as immediate danger. That sounds elegant. It is plain. If a careful man dies while guarding against one kind of threat, he has been killed by another. I sat back, meaning. Meaning the seat tells us not only that Sutter expected company, it tells us what he did not expect. Discover that, Archie. That is Wolfe, Give him half the city and he asks for the blind spot. That night, after Fritz fed us trout and potatoes in a sauce sufficiently civilized to justify the Republic for one more day, I stood at my window and thought about Graham Sutter's seat. He had not taken the nearest empty place. He had selected one where he could watch both doors, the aisle, and every passenger who entered without turning his head like a nervous bookkeeper in a melodrama. The seat wasn't comfort. It was a warning bell he had rung for himself. He had prepared. Which meant whatever killed him had arrived disguised as something preparation did not cover. Chapter 3. The passengers who looked away by 11 o'clock the next morning, I had learned a thing worth keeping about public transportation and murder. People do not merely fail to notice. They select their blindness the way they select a newspaper, a seat, or a way of crossing a street. They notice what flatters their idea of themselves and discard the rest as scenery. The passengers in the last car had all done that. Wolf, after hearing my report on Graham Sutter's seat selection and the missing pale green file, had sent me out again with instructions that sounded simple enough to hide trouble. Archie, the passengers? That narrows New York usefully. Do not be tiresome. Everyone in that car chose a place. Learn why. Reasons overlap. You think the arrangement matters. I know the arrangement matters. Men die in patterns before they die in bodies. So I went back to the city's tunnels, where reason travels sitting down and panic hangs onto straps. Rowcliffe had assembled the available passengers in a station office that smelled of steam heat, paper, wet wool, and old municipal pessimism. He was at a desk trying to make official notes sound more intelligent than their source, which is a labor I have always admired from a safe distance. He looked up when I came in. You're becoming expensive. That is one of my goals. I've got 6 of them. The sailor disappeared, which improves the national fleet. The rest are here. Good. Let's find out how far away from the dead man they each believed themselves to be. He grunted. That means yes when it has no better company. The office girl came first, Miss Watson, mid-20s, brown coat, hat chosen for weather, not beauty, and the durable fatigue of women who work downtown and get home by stubbornness. She sat straight, hands folded, determined to be helpful without being recruited permanently by law. I said, Miss Watson, yesterday you told me Graham Sutter boarded at Grand Central, looked through the car, sat once, then changed seats. Yes. You also said he seemed to be watching. Yes. Did he watch anyone in particular? She frowned. Number not particular, just generally. That is the broadest lie in the city, and usually the most innocent. Narrow it. She tried again. He looked at people when they entered, but not as if he knew them. More as if he was checking whether he ought to. That's better. Why did you choose your own seat? She blinked. What? On the train? Why there? It surprised her enough to make the answer truthful. Because I like the end of the car. Fewer people, less talking. On the left side. Yes, and not nearer the front. Number you get fewer men trying conversation in the last third. That was useful in 2 ways. One of them civic. Did anyone else seem to choose deliberately? She considered. The dark, coated woman did. That improved matters. How? She got in, looked at the emptier benches, and stayed standing by the end door first. Then later, she sat only when the students moved. That was the sort of detail you get when a witness has stopped defending herself and started remembering. I kept going. Did she ever look at Sutter directly? Number, that's why I remembered her. She looked the way he did, at the windows, not the faces. I thanked her and sent her away with the small comfort of having been useful without being trapped into heroism. The widow came next, Mrs. Haskell, who had shopping parcels yesterday and moral certainty today. She was one of those women who make clear at once that the city has been mismanaged since 1907 and that no one has ever properly consulted her on the subject. I have told the police what I know. Yes, I said. Now tell me what you remember. She did not enjoy that. Good. She remembered silence. Yes, she remembered Sutter because he sat like a man waiting for a verdict. That was excellent, and probably truer than she knew. She remembered the students because boys in scarves had blocked her parcel briefly at Bleecker. She remembered the woman in the dark coat because the woman had changed place after Houston, and then stood one seat beyond Sutter instead of taking an emptier bench. Why would she do that? I asked. Mrs. Haskell sniffed. Because she had some business with him, or because women no longer know how to sit sensibly. That was not analysis, but it was local color. Did she speak to him? Number, did he speak to her? Number, then why call it business? Mrs. Haskell lifted her chin. Because no one stands that near a seated stranger in an empty car unless there is some reason. There it was. Not elegant, but correct. The conductor was less help and more precision. Men who spend years in train aisles remember stops, fares, doors and timings, because faces are an extravagance the schedule does not pay for. He boarded at Grand Central, the conductor said. Platform end, last car. You notice because? Because he let 2 doors pass, then boarded mine. Why? No idea. No, but what kind of passenger does that? He thought about it. One looking for room, or one looking for less room than he expected. That was good. He had no bag. Not that I saw. Any paper. Could have had one in his coat. No briefcase. Anyone join him? No one sat beside him. Stand beside. The conductor hesitated. That woman, maybe, for a stop or two. Why didn't you say that before? He shrugged. Because I didn't think it meant anything. That is one of the ways murders prosper. The 2 students were brought together because police like efficiency where truth prefers interference. They were young, overscarved, underwashed, and carrying the full confidence of men who have not yet been told often enough that they are wrong. One remembered nothing but stations. The other remembered everything except sequence. Between them, I built one usable thing at 14th Street. The dark-coated woman was already aboard but standing. At Christopher, she shifted toward Sutter's section. At Houston, or just after, Sutter took something from his pocket and looked at it under cover of the window reflection. At the next stop, she moved again. One student thought she sat across the aisle for less than a minute. The other swore she never sat at all but rested against the pole. Both were probably partly right, which is the usual tax one pays on youth. What about the dead man? I asked. The thin one said, he looked like he was waiting to recognize somebody. That stopped me. What do you mean? He kept looking in the glass as if expecting a face to become one he knew. Not like somebody avoiding everyone. More like he wanted one person and was ready for the wrong one. That was excellent, better than he deserved. When they were gone, Rowcliffe looked at me with the expression of a man whose lunch has just become theory. Well, everybody in that car chose a place for a reason. No kidding. Number and the reasons overlap. He rubbed his jaw. Say it in policeman. Sutter chose his seat to observe both doors and the aisle. Miss Watson chose distance from conversation. Mrs. Haskell chose room for parcels and disapproval. The students chose somewhere they could ignore authority. The conductor knew his car by flow, not faces. And the dark-coated woman chose not a seat, but proximity under camouflage. Rowcliffe scowled. That's not policeman either. It's better. I had them mark their seats on a diagram. Not because diagrams are magical, but because hands lying on paper often hesitate where mouths do not. The pattern emerged slowly, and then all at once. Sutter midway left. Miss Watson 3 benches beyond. Mrs. Haskell nearer the rear, opposite side. Students near the forward third, until one shifted. Dark-coated woman by the rear door first, then nearer Sutter's row, then possibly across, then standing again. Nobody wanted to admit they had noticed her too much. That was exactly why she mattered. I asked Rowcliffe, any station cameras worth having? He laughed without mirth. Worth having? Number existing, maybe grainy platform views at 2 stops. That's almost civilization. He sent a man after them. I went back into the car because once you have witness placement, you owe the floor a second look. This time I stood where the dark-coated woman had likely stood. 1 seat beyond Sutter, near enough to touch the bench edge if the train swayed. From there, a person could watch the reflection too. Better still, she could let Sutter see her if she wished to be seen, or remain only a shape if she wished to let him wonder. She could speak low without turning heads. She could offer something small. A card, a note, a tablet. Nothing that would count as a weapon to a train full of tired citizens. No poison vial had been found. No syringe. No signs of force, no struggle. That did not clear murder. It merely told me the method had arrived disguised as something Sutter classified as manageable. He had prepared for approach, not for surrender. Rowcliffe came in behind me. We got the lab thing back, the white fleck, coating from a tablet. Common enough sedative shell. Doesn't narrow much. It narrows a little. How? If Sutter died by swallowing something handed or shown to him, then the dark-coated woman's standing position becomes less decorative. He grunted. You're in love with her. Number, I'm in business with her. By late afternoon, I had one more thing from Sutter's office. His receptionist, Miss Ma, after an hour alone with her own conscience and a filing cabinet, remembered that he had received a telephone call just before leaving. Not a long one. He listened more than he spoke. Then he said, "Number last car, if at all." After that he wrote Wolf's number on the card and left. That did it. Back at the brownstone, Wolf was in the office where all civic confusion eventually comes for translation. Fritz had placed coffee by my desk and beer by his, which is his idea of balanced justice. "Well," Wolf said. I gave him the passengers in order, each claiming distance from Sutter in both space and knowledge. The conductor remembering tickets, not faces. The widow remembering silence, not motion, until prodded. Miss Watson seeing the dark-coated woman choose position deliberately. The students noticing only enough truth to spoil their own carelessness. The dark-coated woman standing near Sutter in an empty car for no innocent reason. Sutter watching reflections as if expecting one particular face. The tablet coating from the floor and Sutter's final phone call, last car, if at all. Wolf shut his eyes. At length he said, "Good. I know." "No, Archie. Good." He opened one eye. The passengers looked away because they each had their own reason to preserve private space in public. This is ordinary. The killer relied on it. More importantly, Sutter and the woman were both using the car the same way. Reflection, distance, approach without direct acknowledgement. That means one of two things. Either they were strangers, conducting an arranged contact, or they were adversaries, both trained in caution. I sat down. Which? Not enough. He took up the beer, considered it, and drank. But the phrase, last car, if at all, is crucial. It indicates conditional contact. Sutter was not merely waiting for someone. He was waiting to see whether someone would choose to appear. That sounds bad for him. Yes, it also sounds bad for anyone who wished to kill him without seeming to. I leaned back. So everybody in that car had chosen a place for a reason, and those reasons overlapped. Yes, the car was not random occupancy. It was intersecting privacy. That was good enough to keep later. At my window, with the city below practicing its usual trade of light for impatience, I thought about that last car. Every passenger had built a little island inside it. Miss Watson from conversation, Mrs. Haskell from incompetence, the students from responsibility, Sutter from surprise, the dark-coated woman from recognition until she wanted it. Public space is like that in New York. Everyone sits for private reasons and pretends the arrangement is accidental. But accidents do not move one seat closer at Houston and stand one row off in an almost empty car. Somebody in that last car had chosen not merely a place, but a moment. And Sutter, for all his caution, had chosen to let that moment arrive. Chapter 4. The ticket that arrived too late. Timing, in my experience, is one of the few things in New York that remains honest after midnight. Men lie, women improve a story for decency, policemen reduce chaos to paperwork, and newspapers dress all of it for breakfast. But a ticket stamp, if nobody has bribed the machine or married the clerk, will tell you exactly when somebody decided to be somewhere. Graham Sutter's ticket had been bought late. That was the first useful thing Rowcliffe gave me the next morning, though he did it with the expression of a man surrendering evidence under protest. "You wanted timing," he said. Transit pulled the purchase logs. "That's practically progress." He ignored me because by then he had learned my conversation was either incurable or expensive to stop. We were in a narrow office under the station stair where the city stored forms, bad air and junior officials. Rowcliffe stood by the desk with 2 slips of paper in his hand and the posture of a man who disliked both of them. "Sutter's fare card was loaded at 6:41, he said. "Grand Central Kiosk, 9 minutes before departure." "That is late." "Yeah, and another card was loaded at 6:43. Different name on the commuter account. Same station, same fare pattern, same line, same train window." That improved my morning at once. "What name?" He handed me the copy. The second purchase had been made under Helen Vane. That was either a real woman, a false one, or a clerk's revenge on vowels. Either way, it did not please me because it was too tidy to be accidental and too recent to be comfortable. Address: temporary rooming house on Lexington. No useful employer on file. Cash supplement added at the kiosk. Not a full registered purchase. Transit says, the account exists, but thin. That is a polite way of saying it was built to travel and not to be known. Rowcliffe grunted. "You paying attention today?" "Only because you've brought numbers instead of opinions." I took the slips and looked again. Sutter at 6:41, Vane at 6:43. Same station, same car window, same line. If I had been writing melodrama for small town stages, I might have had them buying side by side while thunder rolled and a violin sulked in the wings, but cities do their drama through machinery. 2 late purchases, 2 deliberate boardings, 1 dead man. Who bought first? I asked. Sutter. Who boarded first? We don't know yet. His name was Pomeroy, and he had the flat, patient look of a man who spends his days helping citizens misunderstand machines. He remembered Sutter vaguely, and the woman not at all, which was nearly as good because memory becomes more useful when it resists vanity. Sutter first, he said. Busyness type. Exact change. No small talk. Agitated? I asked. Pomeroy shrugged. Careful, there's a difference. That pleased me because it matched the rest of Sutter's life. Careful men do not often get fair obituaries. And the other. Woman maybe 2 minutes later, dark coat, paid partly from the account, partly cash, didn't wait for help. Did she seem to know which train she wanted? He thought about it. Yes. Not checking the board. Number, not hesitating. Number, then she wasn't deciding whether to travel, I said. She was timing an arrival. Pomeroy looked as if he wanted less poetry and more lunch. That was fair. From there I went to the platform because once money has told you when, you owe the floor a chance to tell you how. Grand Central at rush hour is not a place for contemplation. It is a place where the city hurls itself underground with the confidence of habit and the grace of furniture being moved in a hurry. But if you stand still long enough and imagine one careful man and one careful woman entering the same stream by design, patterns begin making themselves. Sutter had bought late because he did not want to wait in public longer than necessary. That fit the woman, Helen Vane, or whoever had borrowed her name, had bought later, still because she had no need to risk being seen beside him, and every need to be on the same train, that fit better. I stood where the conductor said Sutter had entered and looked back toward the kiosk line. From there, a person watching the concourse could time the purchase. Let the man go ahead, delay 2 minutes, then follow into the same last car without ever making the transaction look shared. Chance if you like, but only if you also believe lightning prefers titled men and churches enjoy quiet. By then I had come to distrust coincidence, the way Fritz distrusts canned peas. I went to Sutter's office again. Helen Ma received me with the same efficient grief, and this time an actual file in her hand before I asked. I thought you'd want it, she said. That is excellent. What is it? Telephone notes from yesterday afternoon. Mr. Sutter was not himself. No, I said. That condition seems to have continued. She let that pass because she had learned my manner was cheaper than patience. The notes were sparse, but one item mattered. At 5:52 Sutter had taken a call, listened, and said, "No office, public only." Then after a pause, "You'll have to show me first." Then another pause. Then, "Last car 7. I read it twice. That's his hand. Yes. Was he frightened? She shook her head. Number annoyed, alert, more like a man who doesn't trust the other party to keep terms. I looked at the note again. You'll have to show me first. That was not social conversation. That was negotiation conducted under caution. What kind of work brought him to that tone? I asked. Family adjustments, trust disputes, estate paper that nobody wanted in court. She hesitated. And private retrievals. That one I liked immediately. What does private retrieval mean in respectable office language? It means locating documents people wish they had lost earlier. That sounds like the city's true civic motto. She did not smile. Mr. Sutter was good at finding paper and bad at riding trains. That got her eyes down to the desk, which was answer enough. Back at the station, Rowcliffe had one more gift, though he wrapped it badly as usual. Platform footage, grainy, distant, and morally offended by light. But enough, we watched it in a little room where the machine hummed louder than Rowcliffe's intelligence, which was a mercy for us both. Sutter appeared first, 6:47. Dark overcoat, hat low, no bag visible, walking without hurry, and too straight for ease. He paused once near the pillar before the platform ramp, and turned his head, not as a tourist does, but as a man checking whether he has been successfully avoided. Then, 50 seconds later, the woman, dark coat, scarf, medium height, pace neither hurried nor slow, face mostly turned from camera. Not beside him, never beside him. She let 2 other passengers move between them at the ramp and took the descent as if the train were all she wanted in the world and all she had planned for an hour. She did not look toward him once that we could see. That was either innocence or technique. By then I had ceased investing in innocence. Same train, Rowcliffe said. Yes, planned. Yes. You happy now? Number, but I'm less ignorant. He gave me a look that should have had better childhood. I asked him, "Can you enhance her face?" He laughed. "Sure, and then I'll ask the mayor to sing." That ended the machine's usefulness. What it gave us was enough. Sutter's ticket had arrived too late for habit, and too exactly for chance. The other had followed not by accident, but in answer. Timing, Wolf had once told me, is a kind of signature because it reveals not merely action but confidence. A man who buys at the last minute may be cautious. A second person, who does so in matching sequence, is making an appointment with his caution. By late afternoon, I was back at the brownstone. Wolf was in the office, where everything eventually goes, that wants to become intelligible. He had a book open and was not reading it. That meant he had been waiting properly. "Well," he said. I gave him the tickets from the top. Sutter's fare loaded at 6:41, 9 minutes before departure, another at 6:43, under the name Helen Vane. Same station, same train window, same line, Sutter buying first, woman following later. Kiosk clerk remembering certainty, not hesitation. Platform footage showing separate approach, coordinated arrival, no visible recognition, which in this town usually means exactly that. Sutter's office note from 5:52, no office. Public only. You'll have to show me first. Last car, 7. Wolf shut his eyes. At length he said, "Yes, I know, good. Number better." He opened one eye. Tickets, unlike alibis, always leave a trace. This confirms arranged contact in a public place selected for controlled distance. Sutter wanted proof before surrendering privacy. The other party accepted his terms, then altered the result. I sat down, meaning he expected to be shown something. Yes, a paper, probably, or an object serving as credential, but his missing file and missing folded note indicate document traffic, not romance. That disappoints the commuters. It should not. Commuters are fools. I let that pass because he was in form. He tapped the desk once with a finger. The late ticket purchase is crucial. It means the woman did not merely happen to be in the car. She timed her presence to his. Therefore, her standing near him later was continuation, not coincidence. That improves the dark coat. Yes, now learn who Helen Vane is, whether she exists, and what Sutter expected to be shown. Also, the phrase public only suggests he feared enclosed space more than exposure. That means he distrusted the person already. I nodded. Later, at my window, with the city below pretending its lights were orderly and not merely repeated, I thought about tickets. Men forge handwriting, rent hotel rooms under lies, borrow names, build alibis, bribe porters, and marry badly. But transit tickets, if bought too late and in sequence, tell you exactly when intent put on shoes. Sutter's ticket had arrived too late for comfort, and just in time for design, and so had hers. Chapter 5. The secretary who knew the pattern a secretary is one of the city's quieter professions, and therefore one of its more dangerous ones. Detectives get credit for noticing habits. Secretaries create the conditions in which habits can be noticed at all. They know who telephones before lunch, and who lies better after it. They know which drawer holds the contract, which voice on the wire means trouble, and which appointment will be called tentative, until it becomes expensive. If you want the timetable of a man's life, you ask his secretary. If you want to know where that timetable might have been bent, you ask her twice. Wolfe had said as much, though in his own way, and with less charity for employment generally. Archie, the secretary. You mean Miss Marr. I mean the woman who knew Sutter's routines down to the minute, and therefore may know where routine became arrangement. That sounds suspicious. It sounds professional. Do not be childish. A secretary's innocence is no more guaranteed by shorthand than a banker's by cuff links. So I went to see Mara Blythe. That was already one correction. Mara Blythe was the woman who actually kept Sutter's calendar, private notes, deferred calls, and, as I discovered the minute, I saw which desk was worn at the edges most of his real life. Helen Marr had been the front, Mara Blythe was the mechanism. She was in the inner room, neat in grey, early 30s maybe, with light brown hair pinned without vanity, and a face that would have been called plain by men who rank women by how much attention they attract in doorways. Those men would have been fools. Mara Blythe had the kind of face intelligence improves every 10 seconds and nerves spoil only if they are losing. Hers were not losing yet. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, "Miss Marr told me you'd return." That was confidence on her part. "She said you didn't look finished. That is the kindest thing anyone has told me this week." She did not smile. Secretaries who work for cautious men rarely waste expression on strangers until the strangers have earned either trust or trouble. I sat down opposite her desk and looked around while she pretended not to notice. 2 calendars, one public and one private. Card file pencil tray aligned with military conscience. Telephone notes stacked by urgency, not by time. One locked drawer, the keys to which were not in evidence. Good secretaries always make one drawer look unimportant and another look impossible. "You handled Mr. Sutter's schedule," I said. "Yes." "Closely." "Yes, closer than Miss Marr. That is why she receives callers and I prevent them." "That one I liked. Then tell me about trains." She frowned slightly. "Trains." "Subway cars, specifically the last one." Her eyes shifted once, not away but inward, which is where good witnesses go when they are deciding how much they can say without making their own lives harder than the dead man's. "Mr. Sutter usually preferred middle cars," she said. "Less conspicuous than the first, less empty than the last." "Usually." "Yes. So last night was unusual." "Yes, but not impossible." She said that a little too soon. I let a second pass, then said, "That sounded prepared." It was accurate. But prepared accurate is still prepared. Now she smiled, just barely. And detectives always prefer accidental truth. Number, we prefer costly truth. It resists better. She folded her hands on the desk. Very calm. Too calm for a woman whose employer had died in a train car carrying Wolf's number. Mr. Sutter changed train habits when he expected contact, she said. That improved everything at once. What kind of contact? The kind he did not want seen entering his office. Clients? Sometimes. Opponents? Sometimes. Blackmailers in good shoes. Mr. Goodwin, if I answer that, you will only rephrase it. That's because words are a hobby of mine. She accepted that with the mild tolerance one gives to minor vices, he handled disputed family instruments, she said. Trust amendments, inheritance papers, missing memoranda, private settlements. Some people preferred station platforms, hotel lobbies, or train cars to offices because offices produce records and familiar faces. There we are. Yes, and the last car. He used it once before in March, a meeting with a man who wanted to hand over original codicils and feared being followed. Mr. Sutter took the last car because it gave him room to observe approach. That matched too neatly to be ignored and too readily to be dismissed. So you knew the pattern? Yes, and last night. I knew only that he expected a contact at 7. In the last car. Her pause this time was measurable. That made it worth money. No, she said. I knew he might choose it. Might. Yes. Did you tell anyone that? Number, that came faster than the rest and therefore deserved inspection later. I asked how the appointment had been arranged. She told it in order. At 5:52, Sutter took a call personally. That was unusual. Many of his delicate callers began with her and were filtered by category. He listened, made notes, and after hanging up told Mara only this. If anyone asks, I left on ordinary business. If I'm not back by 10, lock the green file. Then he took his coat, wrote Wolf's number on one of our cards from a drawer of private references, and left. You didn't ask where. I did, he said. Public transit. Less foolish than restaurants. That sounded like Sutter from the evidence I had. You knew he was worried. I knew he was exact. That's evasive. It's better than melodrama. Good again. That was the trouble with Mara Blythe. Everything she said was either useful or disciplined, and often both. I changed angle. Did he often alter his routine at the last minute? Yes, without telling you. Number, that sounds proud. It is professional. Mr. Sutter understood that if I was to protect his schedule, I had to know the schedule he was breaking. There it was. People who manage schedules also know how to break them cleanly. I said it aloud. Yes, she said. Of course. Then when you said the last car was unusual, but not impossible, what you meant was that it fit one of his contingency habits. Yes, one you knew. Yes, and perhaps someone else knew. Her hands tightened once, tiny but not small enough to miss. Who? I asked. She looked at me levelly. That is the question, isn't it? Number, it's the answer. Who knew his train patterns? Miss Ma, in broad outline. His brother, perhaps, though they did not speak daily. Certain clients after repeated dealings. And me, you're leaving somebody out. Number, yes. The person who called him yesterday and knew enough to propose a public train meeting that would seem acceptable. Her gaze held steady, but the steadiness had changed from calm to effort. Yes, she said. Whoever called him knew the pattern or successfully guessed it. Which is less likely. The guessing. That was as close to confession as I was likely to get before lunch. He went after her directly then, because there are times when subtlety is merely a slower form of cowardice. Miss Blythe, if you knew his patterns, his contacts, his methods, his fallback habits, and his last-minute changes, you knew where a man like Sutter might sit before he decided. For the first time she looked away. Not long enough. Yes, she said quietly, in general, in this case. I thought of it, before he died. Yes. Why? Because of the call. Explain. She drew a breath and let it out evenly, as if rearranging herself to permit honesty without surrender. The caller used no name, but Mr. Sutter's tone changed. He moved from refusal to conditional agreement almost at once. That meant the other party had proof of something, or had invoked something he could not ignore. When he said public only, I knew he would not choose a cafe or hotel lobby. Too static, too exposed. A moving train gives privacy without enclosure, and witnesses without intimacy. That was excellent, and damning to somebody, though not yet her. And the last car. He had used it before for exactly that reason. Yes, so you expected it. Yes, and told no one. Yes. I believed that much, not because she looked innocent. Innocence is frequently ugly in offices. I believed it because she had the right kind of guilt, not guilty of action, perhaps, but guilty of knowledge that had become expensive after the fact. I asked the last necessary question. Did you know the name Helen Vane? That landed cleanly. Not because she recoiled. Mara Blythe was too well run for recoil. But because her eyes changed focus for half a second, the way a hand changes pressure when it has touched a hot rail and decided not to flinch in company. Yes, she said. Who is she? A name used by a woman who had dealt with Mr. Sutter twice before. There. I don't know whether it's her real name. You didn't say it was. She handled inherited papers through intermediaries' family letters, missing annexes. She never came to the office, only public exchanges. And she knew his pattern. Yes. That would have been useful yesterday. Yes. Mara Blythe had now given me enough to take back to Wolf and not enough to keep the office out of the case. I asked for descriptions, dates, prior contacts, all of it. She had little that could walk upright in court, but enough that a mind like Wolf's could dress it and send it out. Helen Vane, if that was the name, favored public transfers, avoided offices, and had once before induced Sutter to take the last car downtown. Not because she feared crowds, but because she preferred witnesses who could later claim not to have seen anything. That was not romance. That was method. Back at the brownstone. Wolf was in the office, and already dissatisfied with the world for making him wait on details. I ought to have brought sooner. I gave him Mara Blythe in order, not just secretary, but keeper of Sutter's private calendar and contingency habits. She knew his train patterns, his fallback meeting choices, and the fact that the last car was a known device when cautious contact was expected. She adjusted her phrasing too quickly when I first mentioned it. She admitted the caller likely knew or guessed his pattern. She identified Helen Vane as a previous public, only contact, who had twice before handled sensitive paper through transit meetings and no office visits. When I finished, Wolf's eyes were shut. At length he said, Yes, you're getting repetitive. Number the world is. Miss Blythe's precision and subsequent adjustment are significant. She knew the pattern, recognized it in retrospect, and initially attempted to reduce its force. Not because she is necessarily guilty, but because people who manage schedules often believe they can manage the interpretation of broken schedules as well. That sounds like secretary doctrine. It is human doctrine. Secretaries merely practice it with more competence. I sat down, so she's in it. She is near it. More importantly, the woman called Helen Vane is now not merely a dark coat on a train, but a recurrent method. Sutter had met her publicly before. He trusted the pattern enough to repeat it. That means his death came not from random contact, but from a known form turned lethal. That was good enough to chill later, at my window again, with the city below doing its usual job of pretending all lights are deliberate. I thought about Mara Blythe. She had known Sutter's routines down to the minute, and his irregularities almost as well. She had told me the last car was unusual, then corrected herself because unusual was the wrong word. It was special, purpose routine, and she knew it. People who manage schedules also know how to break them cleanly. Sometimes they are the only ones who know where a man will sit before he decides. That did not make her a murderer, but it did make her part of the machinery. And by then I had begun to suspect this case was not about one man dying on a train, as much as it was about who had learned his pattern well enough to meet him inside it. Chapter 6. The Conductor's Quiet Memory. A conductor's memory is like a city ledger. It does not begin by loving faces. It begins by counting stops, doors, delays, and the daily incompetence of strangers. If later it remembers a face, that is because the face interfered with one of the important things, which is why I distrust sudden recollection from lawyers and trust reluctant recollection from transit men. Oscar Dunn had remembered more than he had wanted to. Wolf sent me after him with the kind of instruction he favors when he believes the world has already spoken, and I have merely failed to hear the useful syllable. Archie, the conductor Oscar Dunn. Yes, you think he held something back. Of course he did. Most men do. The question is whether he did it from fear, fatigue, or stupidity. Find out. That landed me back at the downtown station office before noon, with Rowcliffe in one room rearranging his temper and Oscar Dunn in another, pretending his shift report had exhausted the available truth. He was a stocky man in his 50s, with the broad wrists of somebody who had spent years working latches and brake doors, and the weary patience of a public servant who has seen too much of the public. He had given us the practical version already. Graham Sutter boarded at Grand Central, last car. Walked past other doors, took a seat, then changed it. Dark, coated woman. Maybe stood near him for a stop or two. Nothing noisy, nothing official until the terminal sweep found a corpse where a commuter ought to have been awake and annoyed. It was adequate and incomplete. I sat opposite him in the station office and said, "Mr. Dunn, yesterday you remembered tickets. Today you are going to remember people." He did not enjoy that. Good. I already told the police what I know. Yes, now tell me what you left out because it seemed too small. He looked at Rowcliffe through the doorway and then back at me. That was useful. A witness who checks for police. First is generally not lying for pleasure. There wasn't much, he said. Number, that's why we're all unhappy. Begin with the stop after 14th. He frowned, not because he objected, but because memory is work, and few people do it cheerfully under fluorescent light. Houston, or thereabouts. The woman was standing near the rear door before that. Yes, and Sutter, in his seat. Yes. He rubbed a thumb across two fingers as if handling an invisible ticket. Transit men do that when they are thinking with their hands. She moved closer, he said. We know that. Number closer than I first said. That improved the room at once. How close? 1 row off him, maybe less. Near the pole. Did she speak? He hesitated. That was the first honest thing he had done all morning. Yes, he said. Louder. Yes. Good, now earn it. He exhaled. Not much, just a brief exchange. Nothing loud, nothing like an argument. I was on the platform side watching a door close, and when I glanced in, she'd leaned a little toward him. He said something, she answered. Then I had the stop to mind. How many words? Not many, could have been 4 or 5 each. Tone, quiet, hostile. Number friendly, number that narrows humanity. He almost smiled, and then thought better of it. Busyness, that's what it sounded like. Not loud enough to draw a head. That matched too much else. What did he say? I didn't catch it. That's poor form. It's a train, Mr. Goodwin, not a parlor. Did you catch anything? Another hesitation. Better this time, because now he knew holding back only made me cheaper and more persistent. 1 word maybe from him. What word? Show, that sat there and made itself comfortable. Show? Yes, or shown, something like that. And there, all at once, was Sutter's office. Note again. You'll have to show me first. Wolf would like that, which meant I had to dislike how long it had taken to get it. What about her? Dunn shook his head. Too low. Maybe 1 word after? Maybe not. I'm not swearing to more. Swear to less, then. Did he turn toward her? Yes. First time. I think so. Did she hand him anything? Number, you're sure? As sure as I can be from a moving car and a door line. That was not certainty, but it was disciplined enough to trust provisionally. I pressed further. Then why leave it out yesterday? His face hardened in the particular way. Men's faces harden when they expect judgment from a fact that seemed harmless until after midnight. Because nobody else heard it, he said. Because it was nothing. Because if a man talks to another passenger on a train, it doesn't become important just because he dies later. No, I said. It becomes important because he was in a car selected for caution and was killed anyway. That one he accepted. I didn't want to make it larger than it was, he said. That's the city's real motto. He looked down at his hands. Maybe. I had him place himself in the car again, door side, half turned, watching the platform, then the interior in the reflection. He had not heard full sentences, only the shape of exchange, brief, quiet. The woman leaning slightly, Sutter answering. No alarm, no visible object passed. Then, as the train moved, she straightened. And at the next stop, she shifted back toward the rear, as though the moment had been completed. That's better, I said. It's still not much. No, I told him. It's enough. Rowcliffe came in then because he has a nose for useful developments, and a manner calculated to make them regret being useful. I told him what Dunn had given us. He looked at the conductor. Yesterday you said no conversation. Dunn met that fairly enough. Yesterday I said none I could swear mattered. And now it matters. Now the man's still dead. That was a fine answer and wasted on Rowcliffe. I got Dunn out before police method could reduce the whole thing to stubbornness and reports. Once he was gone, Rowcliffe said, "You buy him." Yes. Why? Because he remembered reluctantly, corrected himself against his own interest, and didn't improve the detail once he'd given it. That's rare enough to frame. Rowcliffe grunted. That meant he agreed unwillingly, which is the best breed of police agreement. I spent the rest of the afternoon trying to break the exchange from the other witnesses. Miss Watson remembered the woman leaning in, but insisted she had thought it only a request for space or station information. Mrs. Haskell, after enough prompting to qualify as agricultural labor, admitted that there may have been a mutter, but that if New York trains required her to account for every mutter, she would need a stenographer and sedatives. The students, naturally, remembered nothing until one of them recalled that the dark coat lady looked less like a stranger after Houston. That was young and imprecise, and therefore sometimes valuable. By then I had enough to take back to Wolfe, and not enough to rest easy. At the Brownstone, he was in the office with the beer at his elbow and the expression of a man who had decided the case was finally becoming fit for him and resented the delay on principle. Well, he said. I gave him Oscar Dunn, conductor, quiet man. First remembered tickets and seat changes, then, under pressure, the exchange near the rear door brief. Quiet, not hostile, not friendly, but business. One word from Sutter possibly heard. Show. No one else claiming the conversation happened clearly enough to swear to it, which meant one of two things. Either Dunn was wrong, or everyone else had already begun smoothing the truth down to something they could ride home with. Wolfe listened with his eyes closed. At length he said, yes. Wonderful. Number important. If Sutter said, show, then the office note is confirmed in substance. The meeting depended on demonstration. He required proof before proceeding. And she had it? Apparently enough to continue the contact. The fact that no document was openly passed suggests the proof was visual, verbal, or already known but reasserted. That sounds too neat. It is not neat. It is constrained also. Dunn's omission is informative. How? He did not lie. He economized. Witnesses often do when they think a small truth may become a large inconvenience. That means the exchange was easy enough to dismiss at first, and significant enough to trouble him later. Such facts are usually genuine. I sat down. So now we have arranged contact, timed ticket, chosen seat, recurrent public method, and one quiet exchange nobody wants to own. Yes, Wolfe said. And that means the murder depended not merely on Sutter's caution, but on his willingness to continue once the other party had satisfied an initial condition. That condition may prove the case. That is Wolf. He can take one overheard word and make it feel like a staircase. Later, at the window again, with West 35th below, looking wet, temporary, and unconcerned as all proper cities do, I thought about Oscar Dunn. He had remembered more than he first admitted, because memory is not the same thing as permission. He had seen a brief exchange near the door, not loud, not hostile, just enough to matter. No one else wanted to claim it. That did not make them liars. It made them commuters. They had all chosen, in that last car, what not to hear. But one thing in a case like that is always true. If a quiet exchange vanishes from 6 memories and survives in one reluctant mind, the truth is not gone. It has simply begun being erased. Chapter 7. The window that reflected too much. Night windows in a subway car are dishonest in a useful way. They give you the room twice, once in substance and once in suggestion. Men trust substance because it lets them pretend they know where things are. But if a man is cautious or frightened, or merely trained by experience to dislike surprises, he will often watch suggestion instead. Reflection gives warning without asking a head to turn. That was what Graham Sutter had bought when he chose that seat. Wolf had sent me back to the train yard after dinner the previous night with one sentence that sounded mild and meant labor. Archie, look at the windows until they stop being windows. That is Wolf when he is in form. He gives you a line fit for embroidery and expects a diagram in return. So the next morning, I was back in the last car with Rowcliffe, a transit lamp, and enough sour coffee to make patriotism difficult. The car had been moved into a darker siding bay, and the yard men, after suitable complaint, had let us kill most of the overhead glare and recreate something nearer to what the passengers had seen at 7 o'clock. A moving room trapped in black glass, it helped at once. By daylight, the windows told you everything and therefore nothing. By dark, they became second interiors. Seats repeated themselves in shadow, poles doubled. A standing passenger could appear to be 2 different people, depending on where you sat and how much you wanted not to stare. That was the first fact. The second was worse. From Sutter's seat, the reflection gave him the aisle, both end doors, and most of the opposite bench, but not perfectly. There was a broken strip, a narrow gap caused by the angle between 2 panes and the upright seat backs opposite. Anyone moving through that gap from the far side did not vanish entirely, but blurred, became a suggestion first and a body only after crossing the seam. I sat where Sutter had sat and had Rowcliffe walk the car. "Slow," I said. He did, with all the grace of a policeman forced into choreography. In direct sight he was obvious from the first step. In the reflected window he became visible, then lost at the pane seam, then returned. Not enough to fool a relaxed man, enough to delay certainty in a cautious one. "Again," I said. This time I had him use the opposite bench and angle inward, moving not down the open aisle but between seat backs, one hand on the metal top rail. From the reflection, that was much better. Worse. Actually, he appeared only in fragments: shoulder, hand, dark edge of coat, until he was already near enough to speak low without raising the room. Rowcliffe stopped and looked at me. "Well, the window reflects too much." He frowned. "That's an answer. It is if you're not lazy." I got up and changed places, from the seat opposite, then from the bench ahead, then from the rear quarter where the woman in the dark coat had been seen standing. Each angle improved the pattern. The train windows, darkened by night, reflected the car like a second version of reality. Not false, only delayed in the important places. A man watching reflections instead of faces could be approached without direct alarm if the approach used the seams properly. Sutter had chosen his seat to avoid surprise. Whoever came to him had understood the exact weakness of the seat he had trusted. That was not luck. I marked the pane seams with chalk, then had one of the transit men sit where Miss Watson had likely sat, and another take the widow's place. From where they were, the approach would have looked like what half the city later described. Nothing much. A person shifting for balance, a coat edge near a pole, a shape pausing one row off. In a crowded car, it would have vanished altogether. In a nearly empty one, it survived only because the emptiness made every decision deliberate. I said it aloud. Rowcliffe asked, "What?" In a full car, this would have been cover by accident. In a nearly empty one, it required intention. That earned me silence from him, which is as near to praise as I can tolerate before lunch. I went through the witness positions again. Miss Watson had looked down often. Mrs. Haskell guarded parcels and principals, not strangers. The students had been busy being young and therefore useless. Oscar Dunn saw from a conductor's angle, not a seated one. Only Sutter had been relying on the windows as a tactical instrument. That was why the windows mattered. They had not merely helped him observe. They had helped someone reach him. I had Rowcliffe stand at the blind seam and lean half an inch toward my seat. "Say something," I told him. He looked offended. "Like what?" "I don't care. Ask for the time." He did. The voice came to me oddly, not from the aisle, where direct caution lived, but from beside the reflection, as if the window had thrown the speaker forward before the body caught up. Quiet, businesslike, close enough to matter, and not close enough to frighten. I could have believed, seated as Sutter had been, that the other party had respected distance while still entering it. That was very bad for Sutter and very good for me, because then the earlier facts began fitting together with less complaint. The dark-coated woman had not needed to come down the aisle boldly and stand over him like a bailiff. She could have used the seam between reflected segments, the blind spot between seat backs, and the natural courtesy of tired commuters not to inspect people at close range unless blood or singing demanded it. She could approach, stop one row off, lean slightly, exchange a few low words, show him something, and withdraw without ever becoming a single memorable event. Not from the aisle, then from the blind spot between seats. I had Rowcliffe do it twice more while I changed posture, once sitting straight as Sutter likely had, and once angled slightly toward the window. In both cases, the effect held. The seam delayed recognition just enough. The direct sight line remained technically open, but no one watching carefully through the reflection could be said to have seen an approach begin. It simply finished. By then Rowcliffe was irritated enough to be useful. So she comes in from the side, not straight on. Yes, uses the seat backs and the bad reflection. Yes. And nobody notices because nobody's looking where the motion starts. Yes. He rubbed his face with the expression of a man who would have preferred a more traditional corpse. Hell, that was again the proper word. If not the fullest, I took the diagram back to the station office and compared it with Oscar Dunn's remembered exchange and the widow's half-reluctant account of the woman standing too near in an empty car. It all improved under pressure. The woman had not merely stood by Sutter. She had chosen the one way of standing by him that let the reflection misdescribe her until she was already in business. That meant two things. First, she knew how he was using the seat. Second, she had either learned that in the moment from his posture and gaze, which would make her very good, or already known the pattern, which would make her better and more dangerous. When I returned to the brownstone, Wolf was in the office in the posture he reserves, for receiving labor he knew I would hate, and therefore had sent me to perform without discussion. Fritz had placed coffee near my desk, and a thin plate of sandwiches beside it, as if to prove that civilization can survive, alongside public transit and homicide, if properly buttered. "Well," Wolf said. I gave him the windows. Night glass giving the car twice. Reflection useful but imperfect. Pane seams and opposite seat backs creating a narrow blind strip. A person approaching from the far side between benches could appear only in fragments until already close. From Sutter's chosen seat, the windows revealed most of the car, but concealed the exact start of an approach from one angle. The dark-coated woman, if she used that angle, could have reached speaking distance, without drawing the kind of direct attention Sutter's caution was meant to prevent. When I finished, Wolf's eyes were shut. At length he said, "Yes, I expected gratitude. You should not." The reflection confirms that Sutter's caution created its own weakness. He watched the car indirectly because direct staring advertises fear. Therefore, the murderer, or intermediary, if you prefer, used the indirect route. That sounds philosophical again. Number it is geometry with a corpse. He opened his eyes. The important point is not merely approach, it is intention. In a nearly empty car, such a movement does not happen by instinct, it is selected. I sat down. So the windows didn't just show him the room, they misled him about one corner of it. Yes, they reflected too much. Reflection is indiscriminate. It gives abundance without hierarchy. A cautious man may trust it too much and overlook the one seam where interpretation lags behind motion. That was very like Woolf, turning a train window into a sermon against human confidence. I said, she approached from the blind spot between seats, not the aisle. Yes, and that required planning. Yes, because in that car, with that emptiness, chance would have looked different. Yes, he picked up the sandwich, inspected it as if it might be guilty of simplification, and took a bite. That in Woolf is approval enough to publish. Later, standing at my window with the city below, looking as if it had been thrown together carelessly by men who hated alignment, I thought about Sutter and the glass. He had relied on the windows to double the room and warn him early. They did, just not everywhere. In one seam between reflected images, movement became suggestion before it became fact, and that was enough. Somebody had approached him there, not drawing attention because the attention never had time to form, in a crowded car that might have been accident, in a nearly empty one. It was design, and by then the case had ceased being about who was in the car. It had become about who understood exactly how that car could lie. Chapter 8, the business that followed him on board by the time a dead man's profession begins, explaining the passenger list, you may be sure the city has stopped cooperating and started confessing. Graham Sutter had not been in a random car, among random strangers. That had been clear enough from the seat, the ticket, the dark, coated woman, and the careful little exchange near the door that Oscar Dunn had remembered only after his conscience had grown tired of economy. But the thing that brought it into proper ugliness was Sutter's business, not the polite version on the card, adjustment consultant, but the practical one. He handled financial wreckage for people too rich, too discreet, or too frightened to drag it into open court. Estates claims, trust papers, reorganizations, forced settlements, property reallocations. He had a way of turning disputes into documents, and documents into altered lives. That sort of work leaves enemies who do not speak loudly because the papers have already taught them what loudness costs. Woolf had said so over lunch, though he improved it in the usual way. Archie, a man such as Sutter, does not merely resolve matters, he redistributes injury. That should look well on his stationery. It probably did. Find out who in that car had been injured by him directly, or by 1 degree. If chance has become too crowded, it is no longer chance. That put me back in motion with Fritz mildly offended. Because motion, in his opinion, is often a lower form of appetite. I began with the widow. Mrs. Haskell had seemed at first nothing more than parcels, disapproval, and the ordinary civic reluctance to remember anything that might later require another trip downtown. But the city's widows, like its bookkeepers, often know more about inheritance than they care to advertise. I found her in a narrow apartment on East 10th Street, where the wallpaper had surrendered decades ago, and the furniture had only stayed out of stubbornness. She let me in because widows prefer bad news in person. It gives them something to aim at. Yes, she said, before I had properly sat down. I knew the name after I got home. That was quick. I am old, not dead. That's the spirit. She ignored me as women with judgment often do. Her husband had owned a small marine supply concern in Brooklyn. After his death, there had been a trust dispute involving his brother, a warehouse lease, and a life insurance adjustment that had somehow ended with the brother holding more than half and the widow holding less than sympathy deserved. Graham Sutter had not represented the brother directly. He had represented the insurance side, then later the settlement mediator, which in practice meant he had written the terms under which other people learned not to argue. You hated him, I said. She considered it. Number, hate is too large for businessmen. I remembered him. That was better. Had you seen him since? Number. Then why were you in the same car? Because I live in New York, Mr. Goodwin. It does not ask my permission before arranging irony. That was excellent, and probably true, but not enough. When did you recognize him? At Houston, perhaps earlier. The face bothered me first, the name came later, after I was home and had taken off my shoes. You noticed the dark-coated woman? Yes. Did you connect her with him? Number, I connected trouble with him. The woman only stood too near it. I left her with that because there was no more profit in it yet. The mechanic took longer. He turned out to be the man Rowcliffe's office had lazily listed as a salesman, which is what happens when policemen write down occupations from coats instead of hands. His real name was Julian Kerr, and he worked maintenance for a claims reconstruction firm in Queens. More useful, he had once worked for a machine parts company, whose bankruptcy and asset breakup had been adjusted by papers Graham Sutter had helped assemble. Kerr had shoulders built by labor and a face made suspicious by experience. He met me in a garage office behind a roll-up door, with oil on the floor and no patience left in him for city manners. You from the police? Number, I'm from the branch that usually gets there after the police have made the first 2 mistakes. That earned a brief snort. Good enough. He admitted knowing Sutter by sight after I gave him the name. Not at first, then it came back. He was the one with the quiet voice and the clean hands while the rest of us were learning what liquidation means to rent. That had the right bitterness in it. You rode in the same car? Yeah. Why that car? Last one's quieter, easier to sit. Not for a man with your build. You could have taken half the middle cars by ownership. He looked at me for a second and then said, I saw him on the platform. There. I didn't know it was him till I got on. Then, I did. You followed him. Number, I avoided the front. There's a difference. What kind? The kind where a man decides he'd rather keep his temper in a less crowded place. That I believed, not because it was flattering to him, but because he disliked Sutter in the practical way men dislike those who have signed papers over their livelihood and then gone home to dinner. Did you speak to him? Number, did you want to? Sometimes wanting is cheaper if you sit on it. He remembered the woman in the dark coat too, though not usefully at first. Only after I pushed him through the stops and seat shifts did he admit he had thought, for a moment, that she might belong to Sutter's business. Why? She had that same look. What look? Like she had come to collect something she was already counting. That improved her again. From Kerr, I went to the claims officer. That was the most delicate of the 3, because claims officers, unlike widows and mechanics, have a professional interest in forgetting things before they become testimony. His name was Edwin Pike, and he worked for Atlantic Mutual Recoveries, which sounded like a place where ledgers go to grow teeth. He had not volunteered his profession to the police, because men in his line of work often prefer to be taken for accountants, dentists, or wallpaper. I found him in a bar near City Hall nursing a rye and an expression that objected to daylight on principle. Mr. Pike, I said. He looked up and disliked me immediately, which saved time. Who are you? Archie Goodwin. Don't know you. That's all right. I know you were in the last car with Graham Sutter. He held still then, which is the nearest thing to confession many men manage before the 3rd drink. I ride trains, he said. So did Caesar. What do you want? Why you didn't tell the police your name meant something to his line of work. That hit. Pike exhaled slowly and looked into the rye as if it had recently disappointed him. Because I didn't know how much it meant. That's a weak lie. It's the truth. He rubbed his forehead with 2 fingers. Sutter had been working a file for one of our outside settlements. Nothing direct family shipping claims. Interlined trust collateral. Dead ugly stuff. He was good at it. Meaning he could make a ruin look like consensus. That was almost elegant. Men get like that around precise vultures. Did he know you'd be in the car? Number, did you know he would? Number, you're both on the same line. Same hour, same last car, and both tied to the same kind of private adjustments. Pike looked up. I knew him when I saw him. I didn't plan the seat. I believed that too, provisionally. There was something in the way all three of them spoke of Sutter. Not love, not fear exactly. Recognition sharpened by damage. He had moved through their lives by paper and left small structural failures behind him. Income reduced. Title shifted, leverage lost. Rooms moved in by other names. That sort of work does not create dramatic enemies. It creates enduring ones. Back at the station office, I laid it in order for Rowcliffe. The widow knew him from a trust settlement that stripped her quietly. The mechanic knew him from a bankruptcy reorganization that cost him work. The claims officer knew him from current file work. Same car, same night, all with some history to his business. Rowcliffe stared. You're telling me the whole damn train was his filing cabinet? Not the whole train, just the last car. That's worse. Yes, he grunted and flipped a page in his notebook, with more energy than grace. Coincidence. Number or not pure coincidence, Sutter's work had followed him on board. Not by pure arrangement perhaps, but by accumulation. I could see it by then, as clearly as if the subway company had posted it by the route map. Graham Sutter's business had left a trail of quiet damage. Widows narrowed into smaller budgets, mechanics into smaller pay, claims officers into dirtier assignments, trusts rewritten, ownership reshaped. Nobody had burst into song over it because the city does not often give music to paperwork. But those lives had all been bent in some little way by his decisions. And on that night, in that nearly empty last car, those consequences had ridden with him. When I got back to the brownstone, Wolf was in the office, and in the kind of mood that improves when facts arrive prearranged. I gave him the widow, the mechanic, the claims officer, and the shape of it. Sutter's work was not abstract. It followed him in people. Mrs. Haskell had been quietly stripped by a trust settlement he helped shape. Julian Kerr had lost work through a liquidation he had papered into respectability. Didwin Pike knew him through current claims and settlement files, all in the same car, all with reasons not to mourn, all claiming no plan and probably telling the truth only in part. When I finished, Wolf opened his eyes. The last car, he said, had gathered more than travelers? Yes. It had gathered consequences. That is what it felt like. He nodded once. Good. That means the environment of the murder was not merely arranged by tickets and seats. It was charged by prior injury. Whether the passenger's convergence was deliberate or incidental, the effect is the same. Sutter entered a car in which too many histories attached to him. I sat down. You think somebody selected that? Perhaps or perhaps Sutter's line of work made such convergence increasingly probable. A man who traffics in quiet damage eventually discovers that public spaces are no longer public. They are populated by his residue. That was first, rate and irritating because I had been approaching it more slowly. So now what? Now we learn whether the widow, the mechanic, and the claims officer merely happened to be there, or whether one of them was meant to legitimize the setting. In a car where several people have reason to dislike the victim, one actual murderer inherits camouflage. That was Wolf all over. Find one dead man. And he immediately wants to know who profited by the crowd around him. Later, at my window, with the city below lit in the indifferent way only cities and fish markets can manage, I thought about Graham Sutter's business. He had not been a murderer. That would have been cleaner. He had been something the city produces more often and punishes less. A man who made bad outcomes look orderly. A man who signed papers that ended livelihoods and reshaped ownership while calling it adjustment, settlement, or resolution. And in that last car, whether by design or drift, the business had followed him on board. The widow, the mechanic, the claims officer. Not one random witness among them, just lives that had once been altered by his pen. That does not solve a murder, but it tells you when coincidence has become too crowded to trust. Chapter 9. The timing that closed the trap. By the time a murder learns to keep time, it has already become more expensive than ordinary hatred. That was what Wolf said after dinner, with trout bones disposed of, beer properly placed, and Fritz moving through the dining room with the expression of a man who would rather preserve one source than all the police departments in the country. I had given Wolf the widow, the mechanic, the claims officer, the dark-coated woman, the late tickets, and the accumulating certainty that Graham Sutter had not merely boarded a train. He had entered a compartment of his own professional afterlife. Wolf had listened with his eyes shut and one hand spread on the arm of the chair, which is his way of looking idle, while his mind arranges furniture under everybody else's feet. Then he said, "Archie, you have overfed me with people and underfed me with minutes. Find the interval." That sounds mathematical. It is mortal. Men are killed by time more often than by enemies. The enemy merely chooses the moment. So the next morning I went after the schedule. Transit men, unlike priests and family lawyers, worship sequence because sequence can be fired, docked, or written up. There is a stop, a pause, a door release, a door close, a run between stations, a signal delay, another run. And if any of those things misbehave, the city notices, because its shoes get angry. That makes transit timing a useful religion, and one I was prepared to join briefly. Oscar Dunn had the route timings, the conductor logs, and the practical memory of a man whose life had been broken into door intervals for 23 years. Rowcliffe had the station sweep reports, and enough official irritation to keep us all in character. Between them and the yard clock, I built the slice. Graham Sutter boarded at Grand Central. The dark-coated woman boarded after him. The quiet exchange remembered by Dunn happened after Houston, maybe just before the run to Canal, depending on whose memory you let sit nearest the facts. The important interval came next. Between Canal and Chambers, there was a longer uninterrupted run than elsewhere on that section, thanks to signal spacing and one slow merge that held door activity off for nearly 3 minutes. No station stop, no boarding, no alighting, no conductor attention except routine ticket glance, and the ordinary deadening drift that takes a nearly empty late car once the novelty of the riders has settled into nothing much. That was the seam. I had Dunn and Rowcliffe go through it with me twice, then 3 times, tickets checked just before Canal, lighting dimmed not dramatically, but in the standard fractional way the line used when moving into the lower tunnel section, a tiny softening of glare that most passengers would never consciously mark, and all of them would react to by letting their eyes relax. The students had stopped moving. Mrs. Haskell had fixed herself and her parcels for the final stretch. Miss Watson had gone back to her paper. Pike had looked down. Kerr had settled into the sort of brooding men call thinking when trains are involved. Everybody had entered that commuter coma in which one continues being physically present, but has delegated curiosity to the next stop. That was the trap closing. I stood in the car and marked it out loud. No entries, no exits, no platform light changes. Ticket work done. Crowd attention spent, just 3 minutes of ordinary transit silence. Rowcliffe grunted, and that's where he dies, or where the thing is done that kills him. No poison, he said. That was where we had finally improved. The lab had come back clean in one useful way and dirty in another. No toxin in Sutter's stomach contents that could explain a rapid, quiet death. No residue on the seat, no capsule fragments except the common sedative shell coating from the floor that might have belonged to anyone's nerves, and no syringe marked the doctor was willing to marry in public. If Sutter had died from chemistry, the chemistry had either walked in wearing invisibility or not mattered enough to bear the blame. That left us with quieter tools. I sat where Sutter had sat and reconstructed the interval from the blind spot approach. The dark-coated woman uses the pain seam, comes close, speaks low, perhaps shows credential or paper. He continues because the proof satisfies him enough. Then, not in the aisle and not theatrically, something else happens in ordinary movement. A hand to the rail, a shift of stance with the train's motion, a body leaning in on a curve, not a blow anyone would hear as a blow in the run between stations, more like a correction. Pressure close to the neck, thumb and fingers at the wrong places, a brief restraint disguised by a sway, or a short, hard, directed strike delivered below sightline with something small enough to vanish into coat and handbag. Not poison because none was needed, not struggle because surprise and position did the work. Quiet, close, and hidden inside what any commuter would call the natural nuisance of public transit. I tried the seat from 3 angles and got the same answer each time. The killer had chosen not just the place, but the exact slice of time least likely to be interrupted. That matters. People talk about premeditation as if it were only thought. Most of the time it is scheduling. I took the schedule, the station gaps, and the seating diagram back to Wolf. He was in the office in one of his better tempers, which meant only that nobody had recently contradicted the natural superiority of orchids, beer, or his own reasoning. Fritz had placed coffee by my desk, and a plate of sandwiches near enough to suggest confidence in my eventual usefulness. Well, Wolf said. I gave him the interval. After Houston, the exchange. After Canal, the dead run. No entry or exit. Tickets checked already. Lights fractionally dimmed into tunnel routine. Attention gone loose. In every passenger by habit. Nearly 3 uninterrupted minutes in which no one would rise. No one would board, and the whole car would sink into that public drowse mistaken for safety. No poison sufficient to explain death. Therefore the method was nearer and quieter than the car had understood, and hidden inside the ordinary motion of standing, swaying, leaning, and touching the rail. When I was done, Wolf closed his eyes. At length he said, "Yes, that's getting monotonous. Number it is becoming expensive, which is different." He opened one eye. The timing is signature. Not because only one person could observe a gap between stops, but because only one with patience and prior knowledge would base the murder on it. The killer chose the slice of transit life in which scrutiny had ebbed and interruption was structurally impossible. So not impulse. Bifui. Number this was the opposite of impulse. Impulse shouts or lunges or misjudges. This selected a dead run after tickets, after station churn, after the little civic alarms had all settled down. Even the dimmed lights matter, not because they hid the act entirely, but because they softened edges just enough to let commuters prefer indifference. I sat down. No poison because none was needed. Yes, the body was killed by proximity, not chemistry. You have been too eager for vials. He ignored it. The method was likely a brief constriction or directed interruption, something done close, masked by movement, and completed within the interval before chambers. That is why the passengers recall atmosphere rather than act. They experienced only a quiet train carrying one more quiet man. That turned out poorly for him. Yes, because the trap was temporal. Sutter guarded space, not the minute. That one stayed with me, he guarded space, not the minute. Later, at my window, with the city below going about its work of pretending all schedules are rational, I thought about those 3 minutes. In a crowded world, people imagine murder requires spectacle or rage, or at least enough bad luck to spill onto the floor. But public life provides little pockets, where attention loosens all at once. After tickets, between stops, when the lights dull by a shade, and everyone agrees without saying so to go private inside a shared space. That was where Graham Sutter died. Not because the killer had found opportunity at random, because the killer had studied the line, the seat, the reflection, the blind spot, the passengers, and the exact slice of time in which nothing would enter or leave to break the design. The timing had closed the trap. And by then, the case was no longer asking me who had hated Sutter enough to want him dead. It was asking who had known him, the train, and the city's commuter habits well enough to make death look like just another ride downtown. Chapter 10. The last seat taken in the end, the answer lay not in what was used, but in where everyone had been. That is one of the reasons Wolf prefers rooms to people. Rooms, once properly examined, rarely improve themselves for effect. People do. They alter sequence, soften motive, upgrade memory, and downgrade malice until the whole affair begins to look like weather. But a room, or in this case a train car, keeps faith with geometry. If you know where each body was, where each glance fell, where each hand could move without notice, and what the silence between stops was worth, you can often get nearer the truth than any tearful confession would carry you. Wolf did not leave the brownstone, That will disappoint exactly nobody who knows him. He had me bring them in instead, one by one and then together, because he had decided, after hearing everything from the late tickets to the blind spot in the windows to the converging injuries in the last car, that the only honest witness left was arrangement. The office on West 35th was ready by 8:30. Fritz had been told we would have guests, which meant the beer was cold. The chairs were placed exactly far enough apart to make dishonesty uncomfortable, and the room had that polished order Wolf likes when he means to knock disorder flat. Kramer came first, because Wolf had telephoned him with one of those brief statements that always make the police arrive angry and stay curious. "I know who killed Graham Sutter," he had said. Then he had hung up. That is Wolf in one line, efficient, infuriating, and expensive to doubt. By 9, Kramer was installed near my desk, Stebbins near the door, and the others arranged in chairs that were not theirs, and therefore improved their moral posture. Mara Blythe sat very straight, grey suit exact, hands folded, face composed beyond what good sense recommended. Edwin Pike occupied the far chair with the stillness of a man accustomed to standing close to damage without claiming it. Julian Kerr looked as if he would rather have been hit than invited Mrs. Haskell sat like a dowager surrounded by civic decline and not at all surprised by it. Oscar Dunn had come because Kramer told him to, and because honest men, when properly cornered, prefer conclusion to repeated questioning. Miss Watson was there too, pale and tired, looking as though public transit had already taken enough from her without adding homicide. The dark-coated woman was last, Nora Pell, sometimes traveling under the name Helen Vane, not because she was elusive. Not anymore. Once Mara Blythe had admitted the name Helen Vane was an office alias used for certain public transfers, and once the thin commuter account had been traced through a rooming, house-forwarding arrangement to a claims brokerage mailbox, and once Edwin Pike had been made to say under pressure that one outside retrieval specialist had sometimes handled sensitive document contacts for Atlantic Mutual recoveries. The woman had stopped being missed and become a profession. Her name was Nora Pell. She entered with no drama and no use for any. Mid-30s perhaps. Dark hair, good coat, plain hat, face made not for charm but for successful transactions. If you passed her on a platform, you would remember only that she had not wasted your eye. That was one of her working advantages. Wolf let them all settle. He sat behind his desk with his hands on the chair arms and his eyes half closed, looking, as always at such times, like a very large idol of disapproval before whom lies were expected to present themselves in orderly sequence. Then he opened his eyes and began. "Graham Sutter," he said, "was killed because he trusted his own caution. He chose the last car and a particular seat in it for the precise reason Mr. Goodwin has already inferred. From there he could watch both doors, the aisle, and most of the passengers by means of the reflected windows, without turning his head and advertising vigilance. That choice was intelligent. It was also fatal." "No one moved," Wolf continued. "The police found no poison adequate to explain his death, no weapon abandoned, no sign of a struggle, and no witness prepared to say more than that the car was quiet and the dead man had seemed merely another commuter preserving his privacy. That was not an accident. It was design." He turned his gaze first to Oscar Dunn, then to Miss Watson, then briefly to Mrs. Haskell. The passengers looked away in the ordinary metropolitan fashion because each had chosen his seat for private reasons and intended to remain sovereign within them. One read, one guarded parcels. One preserved temper, one regretted his employment, one counted stops, and one, Mr. Sutter, watched reflections. He lifted a finger. "That is the point." The train windows reflected too much. They gave him the car twice, but not honestly. In the pane seam and the angle between opposed seat backs, there was a blind segment, a person who knew that could approach from the far side without appearing fully until already close. Not from the aisle, where caution expects danger, but from the gap between seats, where reflection delays certainty. Kramer grunted. "We know all that. Get to her." Wolf ignored him, which improved the room. No, Inspector. We do not yet know enough. Arrangement matters. Now tickets. Mr. Sutter's fare was loaded at 6:41, 9 minutes before departure. Another, under the name Helen Vane, at 6:43, for the same line and same train window. This was not coincidence, nor was it romance. It was scheduled contact in public space by two persons already accustomed to treating transit as neutral ground. His eyes moved to Mara Blythe. Miss Blythe knew this pattern. She managed Mr. Sutter's schedule and his exceptions to it. She knew that when he wished to meet cautiously outside an office, particularly over disputed papers, he sometimes chose the last car for its observation advantages. She also knew the name Helen Vane as an alias used by a woman who had twice before conducted such public transfers. Mara Blythe's chin lifted a fraction. I told Mr. Goodwin that. Yes, Wolfe said. Because by then concealment had become more dangerous than candor. That landed, but not hard enough to bruise. He shifted his eyes to Nora Pell. Miss Pell, sometimes called Helen Vane, boarded the same train after Sutter, approached indirectly, and stood near him without drawing notice. Conductor Dunn heard a brief exchange. One word from Sutter. Show. This confirms the office note. You'll have to show me first. Nora Pell said nothing. Wolfe nodded once, almost politely. Quite. Your silence is sensible. It is also temporary. He turned now to Edwin Pike. Mr. Pike, your company used Miss Pell as an outside retrieval specialist in matters too delicate for office handling. Pike's mouth thinned. That's not criminal. No, Wolfe said. It is merely disreputable, which in New York is still legal. A flicker moved around the room. Wolfe had begun to build pressure the way he always does, by making each person hear his own part, named with the right degree of contempt. He continued. Graham Sutter's business had left a trail of quiet damage. Mrs. Haskell's settlement, Mr. Kerr's liquidation loss, Mr. Pike's current claims file. Each of them was in the same car, each tied in some degree to Sutter's work. This convergence was not wholly designed, but it was useful. It made the car appear random, while saturating it with people for whom Sutter's presence was not morally neutral. A murderer operating there inherited camouflage. Julian Kerr shifted. Mrs. Haskell sniffed. Pike looked into the rug as if it had become professionally relevant. Wolfe said, but the camouflage alone did not kill Sutter. Timing did. The crucial interval was the run between Canal and Chambers. No entries, no exits. Ticket work completed. Lights fractionally dimmed in the tunnel section. Commuter attention at its lowest ebb. That slice of time closed the trap. Not because the killer improvised inside it, but because he selected it in advance. Kramer said, "Then it's Pell. She was there." Wolfe turned his head. "No, Inspector. Miss Pell provided the approach and the credential. She did not provide the death." That changed the room. Nora Pell's eyes sharpened. Mara Blythe's hands folded in her lap, tightened once. Only once. Wolfe saw it. So did I. He let the silence sit, because when he wants a truth to show itself, he often gives it the one thing most lies cannot bear. Stillness, then he said. Miss Pell met Sutter because she had been told to. She was to show him a document, more accurately, the corner and seal of one, sufficient to prove that the missing green file in his office had become urgent. She was also to keep him occupied in the chosen seat until after Canal. She did this. She spoke to him. She leaned in from the blind angle between seats. She showed the paper. She then withdrew one row off, as multiple witnesses partly recalled. At that point, Sutter believed the real exchange had not yet concluded. Nora Pell spoke for the first time. "I didn't kill him." "No," Wolfe said. "You merely helped place him." Pell closed her mouth. Wolfe turned to Mara Blythe. "Miss Blythe, you knew the pattern better than anyone. You knew where Sutter would sit in a public caution meeting because you had seen him choose the same tactical position before. You knew the train, the timing, the arrangement of risks, and the office instruction concerning the pale green file. More importantly, you knew what was in that file. Mara Blythe did not move. That by then was the movement. It concerned a shipping inheritance adjustment, Wolf went on, in which Atlantic Mutual Recoveries, through Mr. Pike and associated instruments, stood to lose very heavily if Sutter chose to reverse his recommendation. He had discovered, too late for your comfort, that the underlying title papers had been manufactured from partial originals, one of which Miss Pell had recently recovered. He intended to consult me after verifying the proof in person, hence my card in his wallet. Kramer leaned forward, and she knew that how. Wolf's tone did not change. Because Miss Blythe managed Sutter's confidential scheduling and private reference drawer. She saw him take my card. She knew the green file mattered. She also knew, before anyone else did, which train pattern he would choose if the contact insisted on public only. She did not tell Miss Pell where he might sit after the fact. She told her beforehand. Mara Blythe's voice came out level, which was impressive and therefore useless. You can't prove that. Wolf's eyes rested on her. On the contrary, you made one mistake. The only one available to a disciplined secretary. You adjusted your language too early. When Mr. Goodwin first asked about the last car, you called Sutter's choice unusual, then corrected yourself at once. Why? Because you knew it was not unusual in such meetings, that by itself is not fatal. But you then denied telling anyone of the pattern. Yet Miss Pell, who had no reason to know whether Sutter would prefer the front, middle, or last cars on this specific evening, timed her late ticket purchase and boarded in the exact sequence needed to meet him in his favored observational seat. That knowledge came from one source only. Mara Blythe said nothing. Wolf went on, mercilessly calm. Still, that alone would make you accessory to the setup, not murderer. The murderer is identified by place. Mr. Goodwin mapped the car, in the interval between Canal and Chambers, with Miss Pell withdrawn but still present as decoy, the person best positioned to approach Sutter from the near side, not the reflected blind side. Under cover of utterly ordinary movement was not Miss Pell at all. He looked now at Edwin Pike. Pike went pale, not dramatically. Enough. You, Mr. Pike, sat where a claims officer sits on trains and in life, inconspicuously near the actual business, while pretending mere adjacency. You knew Sutter professionally. You knew the file. You knew Miss Pell would show enough to keep him engaged. And unlike Miss Pell, you had the physical access on the near side when the lights dimmed and the run went closed. No poison was needed. A brief close strike with the weighted claim. Cylinder in your right coat pocket, a tool used for seal impressions and document flattening, would suffice if delivered beneath the jaw, while your left hand steadied the rail like any standing passenger in motion. Quick, quiet, hidden in a sway. Mr. Sutter's already turned posture toward the aisle, and window left him grotesquely vulnerable. The room had gone dead still. Pike's lips parted. That's insane. No, Wolf said. It is precise. Mr. Goodwin found the dark transfer mark on the seat edge, where your treated leather folio brushed while you leaned in. The lab found no poison because you used none. The white tablet coating on the floor came from Miss Pell's prop capsule case, used only to suggest prior chemical possibility if needed. Conductor Dunn heard the brief exchange and no more, because by then the important talk was over, and finally you made the oldest mistake in arranged violence. You assumed the public space would erase individual placement. It did not. It merely required a map. Kramer was on his feet. Pike looked around once, fast, not like a man seeking moral support, but like a man recalculating the room too late. She told me he'd sit there, he said suddenly, and jerked his chin at Mara Blythe. That broke it. Mara turned to him. Not in outrage, in contempt. That is often how conspiracies end, not with innocence protesting, but competence disgusted by weakness. Wolf nodded once. Yes, Miss Blythe supplied the schedule and the pattern. Miss Pell supplied the approach and visual proof. You supplied the act. Pike's voice rose. He was going to ruin everything. He changed his mind after the papers were already out. Do you know what that would have cost? Wolf looked at him as if he had asked whether greed burns cleanly. Number and I do not care. Kramer moved around the chair. Stebbins was already there. Pike did not resist much. Men who kill by planning often fight badly in rooms where the planning has ended. Mara Blythe still sat straight. Kramer pointed at her. "You too," she said. "I know." That was all. No tears, no protest. Secretaries rarely waste motion when the calendar has already been closed. Nora Pell said nothing. She watched Pike go with an expression that might have been fury at being dragged into amateur endings, or might have been relief at having done only part of it. In her line, those can resemble each other closely, when they had been taken out. The room loosened by degrees. Mrs. Haskell exhaled through her nose and said, "I dislike trains," Julian Kerr muttered. Should have been him years ago, which was not evidence, but was certainly civic sentiment. Miss Watson looked as though the city had permanently altered her route home. Oscar Dunn sat down hard and stared at the floor, perhaps seeing his last car again and resenting it for having held so much under such ordinary lights. Wolfe looked at Kramer. "You will find the weighted cylinder in Pike's effects or office. It will have been cleaned, but not adequately. Also, Miss Pell will bargain. Do not indulge her too cheaply." Kramer grunted. That was yes, thanks, irritation, and a wish for a less intelligent private detective all at once. When they had all gone, Fritz entered and surveyed the room with one sweep of professional suspicion. "No broken furniture," he said. "That's because Wolfe solved it before Kramer sat on anyone." Fritz looked at Wolfe. "Beer, yes." "To me," he said. "You too." That is his idea of sympathy later. At the window in my room, I looked down at West 35th Street with the wet traffic moving below like polished mistakes, and thought about the last seat taken. In the end, Wolfe had been right. The answer lay not in what was used, but in where everyone had been. He had mapped the car like a confession written in spacing and silence. Miss Watson with her newspaper, Mrs. Haskell with her parcels, Kerr with his anger, Dunn with his doors, Nora Pell with the approach, Pike with the strike, Mara Blythe behind it all, carrying the pattern before the train ever left the station. The last car had not been empty, it had been arranged, and in a city like ours, the final seat a man chooses may decide not only what he sees, but whether he ever stands up from it again.